My computer's being really slow right now. I apologize. Oh, that's cool. I can get the Clone Wars narrator. That's awesome. Okay. That's great. Okay. Hey, guilty. Why has my music not changed? Hello? Okay. That was weird. Say my browser is really lagging compared to my stream. And I'm pretty sure my microphone's working. Okay, yeah, it's showing it's working. Huh. I have a weird new text-to-speak interaction thing, the Tangia. Trying to figure out if I can hook it up to just points instead of bits. That's not showing me what to do it yet. I'll figure it out eventually. Seems to be the running thing for me. Yeah. Why is my chat window still saying the ads are running? That's weird. Yep, it is Fairy Tale Night. And if all goes well, I'll be finishing the book tonight. Then I can start next week with brand new books. I'm not sure what fairy tale book to go for next week, though. It's like one of the few benefits of being a subscriber is you don't have to see them. But I leave it so it shows up in my chat windows, which, you know, if anything else, it warns other people that ads are going to come up soon. And eventually I'm going to try to get more text-to-speech stuff done on here, just so further throw me off the story when I'm trying to read. But yeah, it'll be interesting. So has your book come in yet? I'm kind of curious. Oh. Switch screens, what I'm thinking. Let's see, I've got 5 stories left in this book. Yep, only 5. On page 689, and the last story is 723. Last page is 726. So, 40 pages left in this book. Ugh. Advertisements are going really slow. Been on for... Let's see, how long have I been on? 11 minutes, and I'm just now getting an email notification saying I'm on. Yeah. Man, freaking cold weather's getting to me too. Always makes me sleepier. Not that I'm not sleepy in the first place. But, yeah. Okay, but let's see. Wait a couple more minutes. Ah, man. $9:09. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. It's close enough. What is a Puku Miku? Let's see if I can catch it and find out. Anyway, our first wonderful story of this Friday Night Fairy Tales is The Enchanted Pig from the Red Fairy Book. Once upon a time there lived a king who had 3 daughters. Now it happened that he had to go out to battle, so he called his daughters and said to them, "My dear children, I am obliged to go away to the wars. The enemy is approaching us with a large army. It is a great grief to me to leave you all. During my absence, take care of yourselves, and be good girls. Behave well, and look after everything in the house. You may walk in the garden, and you may go into the rooms of the house, except the room at the back and the right-hand corner. Into that you must not enter, for harm will befall you." "You may keep your mind easy, father," they replied. "We have never been dishonest to you. Go in peace, and may heaven give you a glorious victory." Yeah, that's gone somewhere. When everything was ready for his departure, the king gave them the keys of all the rooms and reminded them once more of what he had said. His daughters kissed his hands with tears in their eyes and wished him prosperity, and he gave the eldest the keys. Now, when the girls found themselves alone, they felt so sad and dull that they did not know what to do. So, to pass the time, they decided to work for part of the day and read for part of the day, and enjoy themselves in the garden for part of the day. As long as they did this, all went well for them. But this happy state of things did not last. Every day they grew more and more curious, and you will see what the end of that was. "Sisters," said the oldest princess, "our day long we sew, we spin, and we read. We have been several days quite alone, and there is no corner of the garden that we have not explored. We have been in all the rooms of our father's palace, and have admired the rich and beautiful furniture. Why should we not go into the room that our father forbade us to enter?" "Sister," said the youngest, "I cannot think how you can tempt us to break our father's command. When he told us not to go into that room, he must have known what he was saying, and he gave a good reason for saying it. "Surely the sky won't fall on our heads if we do go in," said the second princess. "Dragons and such like monsters that would devour us would not be hidden in the room. And how will our father ever find out that we had gone in?" While they were speaking thus, encouraging each other, they reached the room. The eldest fitted the key into the lock, and snap! The door stood open. The three girls entered, and what do you think they saw? The room was quite empty, and without any ornament, but in the middle stood a large table with a gorgeous cloth, and on it lay a big open book. Especially the... Now the princesses were curious to know what was written in the book, especially the eldest, and this is what she read. "The eldest daughter of the king will marry a prince from the east." The second girl stepped forward, and turning over the page, she read, "The second daughter of the king will marry a prince from the west." The girls were delighted, and laughed and teased each other. But the youngest princess did not want to go near the table or to open the book. Her elder sisters, however, left her no peace, and will she, nill she, they dragged her up to the table, and in fear and trembling she turned over the page and read, "The youngest daughter of the king will be married to a pig from the north." And now if a thunderbolt had fallen upon her from heaven, it would not have frightened her more. She almost died of misery, and if her sisters had not held her up, she would have sunk to the ground and cut her head open. When she came out of her fainting fit, into which she had fallen in one of her terror, her sisters tried to comfort her, saying, "How can we believe such nonsense? When did it ever happen a king's daughter married a pig?" "What a baby you are," said the older sister. Has not our father enough soldiers to protect you, even if the disgusting creature did come to woo you?" The youngest princess would fain have let herself be convinced by her sister's words, and have believed what they said, but her heart was heavy. Her thoughts kept returning to the book, in which stood written the great happiness awaiting her sisters, and the fate that was in store for her, such as she had never known before in the world. Besides, the thought weighed on her heart that she had been guilty of disobeying her father. She began to get quite ill, and in a few days she was so changed that it was difficult to recognize her. Formerly she had been rosy and merry. Now she was pale, and nothing gave her any pleasure. She gave up playing with her sisters in the garden, ceased to gather flowers to put in her hair, and never sang when they sat together at their spinning and sewing. In the meantime, the king won a great victory, and having completely defeated and driven off the enemy, he hurried home to his daughters, to whom his thoughts had constantly turned. Everyone went out to meet him with cymbals and fifes and drums, and there were great rejoicing over the victorious return. The king's first act on reaching home was to thank heaven for the victory that he had gained over the enemies who had risen against him. His joy was great when he saw that they were all well, for the youngest did her best not to appear sad. In spite of this, however, it was not long before the king noticed that his third daughter was getting very thin and sad-looking. And all of a sudden he felt as if a hot iron were entering his soul, for it flashed through his mind that she had disobeyed his word. He felt sure he was right, but to be certain he called his daughters to him, questioned them and ordered them to speak the truth. They confessed everything, but took great care not to say which had led the other two into temptation. The king was so distressed when he heard it that he was almost overcome by grief. But he took heart and tried to comfort his daughters, who looked frightened to death. He saw what had happened, and that 1,000 words would not alter matters by a hair's breadth. Well, these events had almost been forgotten when one fine day a prince from the east appeared at the court and asked the king for the hand of his eldest daughter. And 3 days of feasting, the happy pair were accompanied to the frontier with such ceremony and rejoicing. After some time, the same thing befell the second daughter, who was wooed and won by the prince from the west. Now, when the young princess saw that everything fell out exactly as it had been written in the book, she grew very sad. She refused to eat, and would not put on her fine clothes, nor go out walking, and declared that she would rather die than become a laughing-stock to the world. But the king would not allow her to do anything so wrong, and he comforted her in all possible ways. So the time passed, and lo and behold, one fine day an enormous pig from the north walked into the palace, and going straight up to the king said,
"Hello, king. May your life be as prosperous and bright as sunrise on a clear day."
"I'm glad to see you well, friend," answered the king. "But what wind has brought you hither?"
"I come a-wooing," replied the pig.
Now the king was astonished to hear so fine a speech from a pig, and at once it occurred to him that something strange was the matter. He would gladly have turned the pig's thoughts to another direction, as he did not wish to give him the princess for a wife. But when he heard that the court and the whole street were full of pigs in the world, he saw that there was no escape, and that he must give his consent. The pig was not satisfied with mere promises, but insisted that the wedding should take place within a week, and he would not go away till the king had sworn a royal oath upon it. The king then sent for his daughter and advised her to submit to fate, and there was nothing else to be done. Excuse me. And he added, "My child, the words and whole behavior of this pig are quite unlike those of other pigs. I do not myself believe that he always was a pig. Depend upon it, some magic or witchcraft has been at work. Obey him, and do everything that he wishes." Everything. And I feel sure that heaven will shortly send you a release.
If you wish me to do this, dear father, I will do it,"
replied the girl. In the meantime, the wedding day grew near. After the marriage, the pig and his bride set out for his home in one of the royal carriages. On the way they passed a great bog, and the pig ordered the carriages to stop, and he got out and rolled about in the mire till he was covered with mud from head to foot. Then he got back into the carriage and told his wife to kiss him. What was the poor girl to do? She bethought herself of her father's words, and pulling out her pocket handkerchief, she gently wiped the pig's snout and kissed it. By the time they reached the pig's dwelling, which stood in a thick wood. It was quite dark. They sat down quietly for a little, as they were tired after their drive. Then they had supper together, and lay down to rest. During the night, the princess noticed that the pig had changed into a man. She was not a little surprised, but remembering her father's words, she took courage, determined to wait and to see what was happening. And now she noticed that every night the pig became a man, and every morning he was changed into a pig before she woke. This happened several nights running, and the princess could not understand it at all. Clearly her husband must be bewitched. In time she grew quite fond of him, and he was kind and gentle. Bacon. One fine day she was sitting alone, and she saw an old witch go past. She felt quite excited, as it was long since she had seen any human being, and she called out to the old woman to come and talk to her. Among other things, the witch told her that she understood all magic arts, and that she could foretell the future, and knew the healing powers of herbs and plants.
"I shall be grateful to you all my life, old dame," said the princess, "if you will tell me what is the matter with my husband. He is a pig by day and a human by night." "I was just going to tell you that one thing, my dear, to show you what a good fortune teller I am. If you like, I will give you an herb to break the spell." "If only you give it to me," said the princess, "I will give you anything you choose to ask for. I cannot bear to see him in this state." Well then, my dear child," said the witch, "take this thread, but do not let him know about it, for if he did, it would lose all its healing power. At night, when he is asleep, you must get up very quietly and fasten the thread around his left foot as firmly as possible, and you will see in the morning he will have not changed back into a pig, but will still be a man. I do not want any reward. I shall be sufficiently repaid by knowing that you are happy. It almost breaks my heart to think of all you have suffered. I only wish I had known it sooner, as I should have come to your rescue at once."
When the old witch had gone away, the princess hid the thread very carefully, and at night she got up quietly, and with a beating heart she bound the thread around her husband's foot. Just as she was pulling the knot tight, there was a crack, and the thread broke, for it was rotten. Her husband awoke with a start, and said to her, "Unhappy woman, what have you done? 3 days more and this unholy spell would have fallen from me, and now, who knows how long I may have to go about this disgusting shape. I must leave you at once, and we shall not meet again until you have worn out 3 pairs of iron shoes and blunted a steel staff in your search for me." Specific. So saying, he disappeared. Now, when the princess was left alone, she began to weep and moan in a way that was pitiful to hear. But when she saw that her tears and groans did her no good, she got up, determined to go wherever fate should lead her. On reaching a town, the first thing she did was to order 3 pairs of iron sandals and a staff of steel. And having made these preparations for her journey, she set out in search of her husband. On and on she wandered, over 9 seas and across 9 continents, through forests with trees whose stems were as thick as beer barrels, stumbling and knocking herself against the fallen branches, and then picking herself up and going on. The boughs of the trees hit her face, and the shrubs tore her hands, but on she went and never looked back. At last, wearied with a long journey and worn out and overcome with sorrow, but still with hope at her heart, she reached a house. Now, who do you suppose lived there? The moon. The princess knocked at the door, and begging to be let in that she might rest a little. The mother of the moon, when she saw her sad plight, felt a great pity for her, and took her in and nursed her and tended her. And while she was here, the princess had a little baby. Wow. One day the mother of the moon asked her, "How is it possible for you, a mortal, to get hither to the house of the moon?" Then the poor princess told her all that had happened to her, and added,
"I shall always be thankful to heaven for letting me hither, and grateful to you that you took pity on me and on my baby, and did not leave us to die. Now I beg one last favor of you. Can your daughter, the moon, tell me where my husband is?"
"She cannot tell you that, my child," replied the goddess. "But if you will travel towards the east until you reach the dwelling of the sun, he may be able to tell you something." Then she gave the princess a roast chicken to eat, and warned her to be very careful not to lose any of the bones, because they might be of great use to her. When the princess had thanked her once more for her hospitality and for the good advice, she had thrown away one pair of shoes that were worn out, and had put on a second pair. She tied up the chicken bones in a bundle, and taking her baby into her arms and her staff in her hand, she set out once more on her wanderings. On and on and on she went across bare sandy deserts, where the roads were so heavy that for every 2 steps that she took forward, she fell one back. But she struggled on till she had passed these dreary plains. Next she crossed high, rocky mountains, jumping from crag to crag and from peak to peak. Sometimes she would rest for a little on the mountain, and then start afresh, always farther and farther on. She had to cross swamps and to scale mountain peaks covered with flint, so that her knees and feet and elbows were all torn and bleeding, and sometimes she came to a precipice across which she could not jump, and she had to crawl around on her hands and knees, helping herself along with her staff. At length, wearied to death, she reached the palace in which the sun lived. She knocked and begged for admission. The mother of the sun opened the door, and was astonished at beholding a mortal on the distant earthly shores, and wept with pity when she heard all that she had suffered. Then, having promised to ask her son about the princess's husband, she hid her in the cellars, so that the sun might notice nothing on his return home. For he was always in a bad temper when he came in at night. The next day the princess feared that things would not go well with her, for the sun had noticed that someone from the other world had been in his palace. But his mother had soothed him with soft words, assuring him that this was not so. So the princess took heart when she saw how kindly she was treated, and asked,
"But how in the world is it possible for the sun to be so angry? He is beautiful and so good to mortals."
"This is how it happens," replied the sun's mother.
"In the morning when he stands at the gates of paradise he is happy, and he smiles on the whole world. But during the day he gets cross because he sees all the evil deeds of men. And that is why his heat becomes so scorching. But the evening he is both sad and angry, for he stands at the gates of death. That is his usual course. From there he comes back here.
She told the princess that she had asked about her husband, but that her son had replied that he knew nothing about him, and that her only hope was to go and inquire the wind. Before the princess left, the mother of the sun gave her a roast chicken to eat, and advised her to take great care of the bones, which she did, wrapping them in a bundle. Then she threw away her second pair of shoes, which were quite worn out, and with her child on her arm and her staff in her hand, she set forth on her way to the wind. In these wanderings she met with even greater difficulties than before, for she came upon one mountain of flints after another, out of which tongues of fire would flare up. She passed through woods which had never been trodden by a human foot, and to cross fields of ice and avalanches of snow. The poor woman nearly died from these hardships, but she kept a brave heart, and at length she reaches an enormous cave in the side of the mountain. This is where the wind lived. There was a little door in the railing at the front of the cave, and here the princess knocked and begged for admission. The mother of the wind had pity on her, and took her in, that she might rest a little. Here, too, she was hidden away, so that the wind might not notice her. The next morning the mother of the wind told her that her husband was living in a thick wood, so thick that no axe had been able to cut a way through it. Here he had built himself a sort of house by placing trunks of trees together and fastening them with ties, and where he lived alone, shunning mankind. After the mother of the wind had given the princess a chicken to eat, and warned her to take care of the bones, because she advised her to go by the Milky Way, which at night lies across the sky, and to wander on till she reached her goal. Having thanked the old woman, she, with tears in her eyes, for her hospitality, and for the good news she had given her, the princess set out on her journey, and rested neither night nor day, so great was her longing to see her husband again. On and on she walked until her last pair of shoes fell in pieces, so she threw them away and went on with bare feet, not heeding the bogs, nor the thorns that wounded her, nor the stones that bruised her. At last she reached a beautiful green meadow on the edge of a wood. Her heart was cheered by the sight of flowers and the cool grass, and she sat down and rested for a little. But hearing the birds chirping to their mates among the trees made her think with longing of her husband, and she wept bitterly, and taking her child into her arms and her bundle of chicken bones on her shoulder, she entered the wood. For 3 days and 3 nights she struggled through it, but could find nothing. She was quite worn out with weariness and hunger, and even her staff was no further help of her, for in her many wanderings it had become quite blunted. She almost gave up in despair, but made one last great effort, and suddenly in a thicket she came upon a sort of house that the mother of the wind had described. It had no windows, and the door was up in the roof. Around the house she went, in search of steps, but could find none. What was she to do? How was she to get in? She thought and tried in vain to climb up to the door. Then suddenly she bethought her of her chicken bones, which she had dragged all that weary way there, and said to herself,
"They would have not have told me to take such good care of these bones, if they had not had some good reason for doing so. Perhaps now, in my hour of need, they may be of some use to me."
So she took out the bones from her bundle, and having thought for a moment, she placed 2 ends together. To her surprise, they stuck tight. Then she added the other bones, until she had 2 long poles the height of the house. These she placed against the wall, at a distance of a yard from each other. Across them she placed the other bones, piece by piece, like the steps of a ladder. As soon as one step was finished, she stood upon it, and made the next one, and then the next, till she was close to the top and the door. But just as she got near the top, she noticed that there were no more bones left for the last rung of the ladder. What was she to do? Without that last step, the whole ladder was useless. She must have lost one of the bones. Then suddenly an idea came to her. Taking a knife, she chopped off her little finger, and placing it on the last step, it stuck as the bones had done. The ladder was complete, and with her child on her arm, she entered the door of the house. Here she found everything in perfect order. Having taken some food, she laid the child down to sleep in a trough that was on the floor, and sat down herself to rest. When her husband, the pig, came back to his house, he was startled by what he saw. At first he could not believe his eyes, and stared at the ladder of bones, and at the little finger at the top of it. He felt that some fresh magic must be at work here, and in his terror he almost turned away from his house. But then a better idea came to him, and he changed himself into a dove, so that no witchcraft could have power over him. And he flew into the room without touching the ladder. Here he found a woman rocking a child. At the sight of her, and looking so changed by all that she had suffered for his sake, his heart was moved by such love and longing, and by so great a pity that he suddenly became a man. The princess stood up when she saw him, and her heart beat with fear, for she did not know him. But when he had told her who he was, in her great joy she forgot all of her sufferings, and they seemed as nothing to her. He was a very handsome man, as straight as a fir tree. They sat down together, and she told him all of her adventures, and he wept with pity at the tale. And then he told her his own history. "I am a king's son. Once, when my father was fighting some dragons, who were the scourge of the country, I slew the youngest dragon. His mother, who was a witch, cast a spell over me and changed me into a pig. It was she who, in disguise of an old woman, gave you the thread to bind around my foot, so that, indeed, the 3 last days had run before the spell was broken. I was forced to remain a pig for 3 more years. Now that we have suffered for each other, and we have found each other again, let us forget the past." And in their joy they kissed one another. Next morning they set out early to return to his father's kingdom. Great was the rejoicing of all the people when they saw him and his wife. His father and his mother embraced them both, and there was feasting in the palace for 3 days and 3 nights. Then they set out to see her father. The old king nearly went out of his mind with joy beholding his daughter again. When she told him all her adventures, he said to her, "Did I not tell you that I was quite sure that the creature who wooed you and won you as his wife had not been born a pig? You see, my child, how wise you were in doing what I told you." As the king was old and had no heirs, he put them on the throne in his place, and they ruled as only kings rule who have suffered many things. And if they were not dead, they are still living and ruling happily. So clearly, the moral of the story is do what your father tells you to. Well, and thank you, Oni, for the bits. I feel like I should record my own version of that, just for the hell of it. And then I wouldn't charge. Well, I guess I could still set it for bits. I don't know. Toss a coin to your witcher, oh valley of plenty. Oh valley of plenty, whoa. Toss a coin to your witcher, oh valley of plenty. Anyway. I guess this next one would be for Sam, but, you know. I haven't seen her pop up yet, so I don't know if Sammy's here. But oh well. I may or may not have recorded this story before. No, it says it's in the Orange Fairy book. I haven't done Orange Fairy book yet. I guess I could go back to the fairy books after this one. Get all Andrew Lang's stuff taken care of. Just have to make sure I retitle this one's playlist so it knows it's a combination. Well, everything in here has been out of the Orange Fairy. Well, been out of one of the Andrew Lang books, so I guess it doesn't matter. Yeah. I just realized I don't hear my sounds. Because they're off. There we go. Can't believe I didn't have my background going. Well, I can, but yeah. Anyway, our next story for the wonderful Friday Night Fairy Tale series. The Clever Cat from the Orange Fairy book. Once upon a time there lived an old man who dwelt with his son on a small hut on the edge of the plain. He was very old, and had worked very hard, and when at last he was struck down by illness, he felt that he should never rise from his bed again. So one day he bade his wife summon their son, and when he came back from his journey to the nearest town, where he had been going to buy bread.
"Come hither, my son," he said. "I know myself to be dying, and I have nothing to leave you but my falcon, my cat, and my greyhound. But if you make good use of them, you will never lack food. Be good to your mother, as you have been to me. And now, farewell."
Then he turned his face to the wall and died. There was great mourning in the hut for many days, but at length the sun rose up, and calling to his greyhound, his cat, and his falcon, he left the house, saying that he would bring back something for dinner. Wandering over the plain, he noticed a troop of gazelles, and pointed to his greyhound to give chase. The dog soon brought down a fine, fat beast, and slinging it over his shoulders, the young man turned homewards. On the way, however, he passed a pond, and as he approached, a cloud of birds flew into the air. Shaking his wrist, the falcon seated on it darted into the sun and swooped down upon the quarry he had marked, which fell dead to the ground. The young man picked it up and put it in his pouch, and then went towards home again. Near the hut was a small barn in which he kept the produce of a little patch of corn, which grew so close to the garden. Here a rat ran out almost under his feet, followed by another and another, but quick as thought the cat was upon them, and not one escaped her. When all the rats were killed, the young man left the barn. When all the rats were killed, okay. He took the path leading to the door to the hut, but stopped on feeling a hand laid on his shoulder. "Young man," said the ogre, for such was the stranger, "you have been a good son, and you deserve a piece of luck which has befallen on you this day. Come with me to the shining lake yonder, and fear nothing." Wondering a little at what might be going to happen to him, the youth did as the ogre bade him, and when they reached the shore of the lake, the ogre turned and said to him, "Step into the water and shut your eyes. You will find yourself sinking slowly to the bottom, but take courage. All will go well. Only bring up as much silver as you can carry, and we will divide it between us." So the young man bravely stepped into the lake and felt himself sinking until he reached the firm ground at last. In front of him lay 4 heaps of silver, and in the midst of them a curious white shining stone, marked all over with strange characters, such as he had never seen before. He picked it up in order to examine it more closely, and as he held it, the stone spoke. "As long as you hold me, all the wishes will come true," he said. "But hide me in your turban, and then call to the ogre when you are ready to come up." In a few minutes the young man stood again by the shores of the lake. "Well, where's the silver?" asked the ogre, who awaited him. My father, how can I tell you? So bewildered was I, and so dazzled by the splendors of everything I saw, that I stood like a statue, unable to move. Then, hearing steps approaching, I got frightened and called to you, as you know." "You're no better than the rest," cried the ogre, and turned away in a rage. When he was out of sight, the young man took the stone from his turban and looked at it. "I want the finest camel that can be found, and the most splendid garments," he said. "Shut your eyes," replied the stone, and he shut them, and when he opened them again, the camel that he had wished for was standing before him, while the festal robes of a desert prince hung from its shoulders. Mounting the camel, he whistled the falcon to his wrist, and followed his greyhound and his cat, and he started homeward. His mother was sewing at the door when the magnificent stranger rode up, and filled with surprise, she bowed low before him. "Don't you know me, mother?" he said with a laugh, and on hearing his voice the good woman nearly fell to the ground with astonishment. "How have you got the camel in those clothes?" she asked. "Can a son of mine have committed murder in order to possess those?" "Do not be afraid. They are quite honestly come by," answered the youth. "I will explain all by and by. But now you must go to the palace and tell the king I wish to marry his daughter." At these words the mother thought her son had certainly gone mad, and stared blankly at him. The young man guessed what was in her heart, and replied with a smile, "Fear nothing. promise all that he asks. It will be fulfilled somehow. So she went to the palace, where she found the king sitting in the Hall of Justice, listening to the petitions of his people. The woman waited until all had been heard, and the hall was empty, and then she went up and knelt before the throne.
My son has sent me to ask for the hand of the princess, she said.
The king looked at her and thought she was mad. But instead of ordering his guards to turn her out, he answered gravely. Before he can marry the princess, he must build me a palace of ice, which can be warmed with fires, and wherein the rarest singing birds can live.
It shall be done, your majesty.
And she got up and left the hall quickly. Her son was anxiously awaiting her outside the palace gates, dressed in the clothes that he wore every day. Well, what have I got to do? He asked impatiently, drawing his mother aside so that no one would overhear them.
Oh, something quite impossible, and I hope you will put the princess out of your head, she replied.
Well, but what is it? Persisted he.
Nothing but build a palace of ice wherein fires can burn, and shall keep it warm so that the delicate singing birds can live in it.
I thought it would be something much harder than that, exclaimed the young man. I'll see to it at once. And leaving his mother, he went into the country and took a stone from his turban. I want a palace of ice that can be warmed with fires and filled with the rarest singing birds.
Shut your eyes, then,
said the stone, and he shut them. And when he opened them again, there was the palace, more beautiful than anything he could have imagined. Fires throwing a soft pink glow over the ice. It's even fit for the princess, he thought to himself. As soon as the king awoke the next morning, he ran to the window, and there across the plain he beheld the palace. That young man must be a great wizard. He may be useful to me. And when the mother came again to tell him that his orders had been fulfilled, he received her with great honor, and bade her tell her son that the wedding was fixed for the following day. The princess was delighted with her new home, and with her husband also, and several days slipped happily by, spent in turning over all the beautiful things that the palace contained. But at length the young man grew tired of always staying inside walls, and he told his wife that the next day he must leave her for a few hours and go hunting. You will not mind, he asked, and she answered as became a good wife.
Yes, of course I shall mind, but I shall spend the days planning on some dresses, and then I shall be so delighted when you come back, you know.
So the husband went off to hunt, with the falcon on his wrist and the greyhound and the cat behind him. For the palace was so warm that even the cat did not mind living in it. No sooner had he gone than the ogre, who had been watching his chance for many days, knocked at the door of the palace. I have just returned from a far country, he said, and I have seen the largest and most brilliant stones in the world with me. The princess is known to love beautiful things. Perhaps she might like to buy some. Now, the princess had been wondering for many days what trimming she should put on her dresses, so that they should outshine the dresses of other ladies at the court balls. Nothing that she had thought of seemed good enough, so when the message was brought that the ogre and his wares were below, she at once ordered that he should be brought to her chamber. Oh, what beautiful stones he laid before her, What lovely rubies, and what rare pearls! No other lady would have jewels like this. Of the princess, of that, the princess was quite sure. But she cast down her eyes so that the ogre might not see how much she longed for them.
I fear that they are too costly for me, she said carelessly. Besides, I have hardly need for any more jewels just now.
I have no particular wish to sell them myself, said the ogre with equal indifference, but I have a necklace of shining stones which was left to me by my father, and one, largest engraven with weird characters, is missing. I have heard that it is in your husband's possession, and if you can get me that stone, you shall have all these jewels that you choose. But you will have to pretend that you want it for yourself, and, above all, do not mention me, for he sets great store by it, and would never part with it to a stranger. Tomorrow I will return with some jewels yet finer than those I have with me today. So, madam, farewell. Left alone, the princess began to think of many things, but chiefly as to whether she would persuade her husband to give her the stone or not. At one moment she felt she had already bestowed so much upon her that it was a shame to ask for only objects he kept back. No, it would be mean. She could not do it. But then, those diamonds and those strings of pearls. After all, she had only been married a week, and the pleasure of giving it to her ought to be far greater than the pleasure of keeping it for himself. And she was sure that it would be so. Princesses. Well, that evening, when the young man had supped off his favorite dishes, which the princess took care to have especially prepared for him, she sat down close beside him and began stroking his head. For some time she did not speak, but listened attentively to all the adventures that had befallen him that day. "But I was thinking of you all the time," he said at the end, "and wishing that I could bring you back something you would like. But alas, what is there that you do not possess already?"
How good of you not to forget me when you are in the midst of such dangers and hardships, answered she. Yes, it is true I have many beautiful things, but if you want to give me a present, and tomorrow is my birthday, there is one thing that I wish for very much.
"And what is that? Of course I shall have it to you directly," he asked eagerly.
It is that bright stone which fell out of the folds of your turban a few days ago, she answered, playing with his finger. The little stone with all those funny marks upon it. I never saw any stone like it before.
The young man did not answer at first, and then said slowly, "I have promised, and therefore I must perform. But will you swear to never part from it, and keep it safely with you always? More I cannot tell you, but I beg you earnestly to take heed to this." The princess was a little startled by his manner, and began to be sorry that she had ever listened to the ogre. But she did not like to draw back, and pretended to be immensely delighted at her new toy, and kissed and thanked her husband for it.
After all, I needn't give it to the ogre, she thought as she dropped off to sleep.
Unluckily, the next morning the young man went hunting again, and the ogre, who was watching, knew this, and did not come till much later than before. At the moment that he knocked at the door of the palace, the princess had tired of all her employments, and her attendants were at their wits' end on how to amuse her, when a tall negro dressed in scarlet came to announce that the ogre was below, and desired to know if the princess would like to speak to him.
"Bring him hither at once,"
cried she, springing up from her cushions, and forgetting all her resolves from the previous night. In another moment she was bending with rapture over glittering gems. "Have you got it?" asked the ogre in a whisper, for the princess's ladies were standing near, as they dared to catch a glimpse of the beautiful jewels.
Yes, here,
she answered, slipping the stone from her sash and placing it among the rest. Then she raised her voice and began to talk quickly over prices of chains and necklaces, and after some bargaining to deceive her attendants, she declared that she liked the one string of pearls better than the rest, and that the ogre might take away the other things, which were not half as valuable as he had supposed. As you please, madam, said she, bowing himself out of the palace. As soon as he had gone, curious things happened. The princess carelessly touched the wall of her room, which was wont to reflect the warm red light of the fire on the hearth, and found her hand quite wet. She turned around, and was it her fancy, or did the fire burn more dimly than before? Hurriedly she passed into the picture gallery, where pools of water showed here and there on the floor, and a cold chill ran through her whole body. At that instant her front ladies came running down the stairs, crying,
Madam, madam, what has happened? The palace is disappearing under our eyes.
Shh! My husband will be home very soon, answered the princess, who, though nearly as much frightened as her ladies, felt that she must set them to a good example.
Wait till then, and he will tell us what to do.
So they waited, seated on the highest chairs they could find, wrapped in their warmest garments, with piles of cushions under their feet, while the poor birds flew with numbed wings hither and thither, till they were so lucky as to disappear an open window in some forgotten corner. Through this they vanished, and were seen no more. At last, when the princess and her ladies had been forced to leave the upper rooms, where the walls and floors had melted away, and to take refuge in the hall, the young man came home. He had ridden back a long winding road from which he did not see the palace till he was close up upon it, and stood horrified at the spectacle before him. He knew in an instant that his wife must have betrayed his trust, but he could not reproach her, as she must be suffering enough already. Hurrying on, he sprang over all that was left to the palace walls, and the princess gave a cry of relief at the sight of him. "Come quickly," he said, "or you'll be frozen to death." And a dreary little procession set out of the king's palace, the greyhound, the cat, bringing up the rear. At the gates he left them, though his wife besought him to allow her to enter. "You have betrayed me and ruined me," he said sternly. "I go to seek my fortune alone." And without another word he turned and left her. With his falcon on his wrist, and his greyhound and cat behind him, the young man walked a long way, inquiring of everyone he met whether they had seen the enemy, the ogre. But nobody had. And then he bade his falcon fly up to the sky, up, and try if his sharp eyes could discover the old thief. The bird had to go so high that it did not return for some hours, but he told his master that the ogre was lying asleep in a splendid palace in the far country on the shores of the sea. This was delightful news to the young man, who instantly brought up some meat for the falcon, bidding him to make a good meal. "Tomorrow," said he, "you will fly to the palace where the ogre lies, and while he is asleep you will search about for a stone which is engraved with strange signs. This you will bring to me. In 3 days I expect you shall be back here."
"Well, I must take the cat with me,"
answered the bird. The sun had not yet risen before the falcon soared high into the air, and the cat seated on his back, with his paws tightly clasping around the bird's neck.
"You had better shut your eyes, or you may get giddy," said the bird,
and the cat, who had never before been off the ground except to climb a tree, did as she was bid. All that day and all that night they flew, and in the morning they saw the ogre's palace lying beneath them.
Dear me, said the cat, opening her eyes for the first time. That looks like every city rat down there. Let us go down to it. They may be able to help us.
So they alighted in some bushes in the heart of the rat city. The falcon remained where he was, but the cat lay down outside the principal gates, causing terrible excitement among the rats. At length, seeing she did not move, one bolder than the rest put his head out of an upper window of the castle, and said in a trembling voice,
Why have you come here? What do you want? If it is anything in our power, tell us and we will do it. If you had let me speak to you before, I would have put the rats as I came as a friend, replied the cat. And I shall be greatly obliged to you if you would send 4 of the strongest and cunningest among you to do me a service. Oh, we shall be delighted, answered the rat, much relieved. But if you will inform me what it is you wish them to do, I shall be better able to judge who is the most fitted for the position. I thank you, said the cat. Well, what they have to do is this. Tonight they must burrow under the walls of a castle and go up to a room where the ogre lies asleep. Somewhere about him he has hidden a stone on which are engraved strange signs. When they have found it, they must take it from him without his waking and bring it to Meow. Your instructions shall be obeyed, replied the rat, and he went out to give his instructions.
About midnight, the cat, who was still sleeping before the gate, was awakened by some water flung at her by the head rat, who would not make up his mind to open the doors.
Here is the stone you wanted,
he said, when the cat started up with a loud meow.
If you will hold up your paws, I will drop it down.
And so he did.
Now farewell, continued the rat. You have a long way to go and will need to get your start before daybreak. Your counsel is good, replied the cat, smiling to itself,
and putting the stone in her mouth, she went off to seek the falcon. Now, all this time neither the cat nor the falcon had any food. The falcon soon got tired of carrying such a heavy burden. When the night arrived, he declared that he would go no further, and he would spend it on the banks of a river. And it is my turn to take care of the stone, he said, because it seems as you have not done everything, and I nothing.
No, I got it, and I will keep it,
answered the cat, who was tired and cross, and they began a fine quarrel. But unluckily, in the midst of it, the cat raised her voice, and the stone fell into the ear of a fish, which happened to be swimming by. Though both the cat and the falcon sprang into the water afterwards, they were too late. Half drowned, and more than half choked, the 2 faithful servants scrambled back to land again. The falcon flew to a tree and spread his wings in the sun to dry, but the cat, after giving herself a good shake, began to scratch up the sandy banks and throw the bits into the river.
And what are you doing that for? asked the little fish. Do you know that you are making the water quite muddy? That doesn't matter to me, answered the cat. I am going to fill up all the rivers so that the fishes may die. That is very unkind, as we have never done you any harm, replied the fish. Why are you so angry at us? Because one of you has a stone of mine, a stone with strange signs upon it which dropped into the water. I will promise to get it back. If you promise to get it back for me, why, perhaps I may leave your river alone. I will certainly try, answered the fish in a great hurry. But you must have a little patience, as it may not be an easy task.
And in an instant his scales might have been seen flashing quickly along. The fish swam as fast as he could into the sea, which was not a far distance, and calling together all his relations who lived in the neighborhood, he told them of the terrible danger which threatened the dwellers of the river.
None of us have got it, said the fishes, shaking their heads. But in the bay yonder there was a tunny who, though he was so old, always goes everywhere. He will be able to tell you about it, if anyone can.
And so the little fish swam off to the tunny, and again related his story. "Why, I was in that river only a few hours ago," said the tunny, "and as I was coming back something fell into my ear, and it is still there, for I went to sleep. When I got home I forgot all about it. Perhaps it may be what you want." And stretching up his tail, he whisked out the stone.
I think that must be it, said the fish with joy.
And taking the stone in his mouth, he carried it to the place where the cat was waiting for him.
"I'm much obliged to you," said the cat, as the fish laid the stone on the sand. "And to reward you, I will let your river alone."
And she mounted the falcon's back, and they flew to their master. How glad he was to see them again, with his magic stone in their possession. In a moment he wished for a palace, but this time it was green marble. And then he wished for the princess and her ladies to occupy it. And they lived for many years. And when the old king died, the princess's husband reigned in his stead. Is that the second or third story? Good Lord, that's on the second story. I'm going to finish this book tonight, even if I run long. Our next story for the night. I don't know how many pages stick together. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, The Magician's Horse, from the Grey Fairy Book. Once upon a time there was a king who had 3 sons. Now it happened that one day these 3 princes went out hunting for a large forest at some distance from their father's palace. The youngest prince lost his way, so his brothers had to return home without him. For 4 days the prince wandered through the glades of the forest, sleeping on moss beneath the stars at night, and by day living on roots and wild berries. At last, on the morning of the 5th day, he came to a large open space in the middle of the forest. And here stood a stately palace, but neither within nor without was there any trace of human life. The prince entered the open door and wandered through the deserted rooms without seeing a living soul. At last he came on a great hall, and in the center of the hall was a table spread with dainty dishes and choice wines. The prince sat down and satisfied his hunger and thirst, and immediately afterwards the table disappeared from his sight. This struck the prince as very strange. Imaginably so. But though he continued his search through all the rooms, upstairs and down, he could find no one to speak to. At last, just as he was beginning to get dark, he heard steps in the distance, and he saw an old man coming towards him up the stairs.
"What are you doing wandering around about my castle?" said the old man.
To whom the prince replied, "I lost my way hunting in the forest. If you will take me into your service, I would like to stay with you and serve you faithfully."
"Very well," said the old man. "You may enter my service. You will have to keep the stove always lit. You have to fetch the wood for it from the forest, and you will have to charge the black horse in the stables. I will pay you a florin a day, and at meal times you will always find the table in the hall spread with food and wine, and you can eat and drink as much as you require."
The prince was satisfied, and entered the old man's service, and promised to see that there was always wood on the stove, so that the fire should never die out. Now, though he did not know it, his new master was a magician. And the flame of the stove was a magic fire, and if it had gone out, the magician would have lost a great part of his power. One day the prince forgot, and let the fire burn so low that it nearly burnt out. Just as the flame was flickering, the old man stormed into the room.
"What do you mean by letting the fire burn so low?" he growled. "I have only arrived in the nick of time."
And while the prince hastily threw a log on the stove and blew the ashes to kindle the glow, his master gave him a severe box on the ear, and warned him that if it ever happened again, it would fare badly for him. One day the prince was sitting disconsolate in the stables, when, to his surprise, the black horse spoke to him. "Come into my stall," it said. "I have something to say to you. Fetch my bridle and saddle from the cupboard, and put them on me. Take the bottle that is beside them. It contains an ointment which will make your hair shine like pure gold. Then put all the wood you gather on the stove, and keep it piled until it is quite high up." So the prince did what the horse told him. He saddled and bridled the horse, put the ointment on his hair until it shined like gold, and made such a big fire on the stove that the flames sprang up and set the roof on fire. In a few minutes the palace was burning like a huge bonfire. Oops. Then he hurried back to the stables, and the horse said to him, "There is one more thing you must do. In the cupboard you will find a looking-glass, a brush, and a riding whip. Bring them with you, mount on my back, and ride as hard as you can, for now the house is burning merrily." The prince did as the horse bade him. Scarcely had he got in the saddle than the horse took off and away, galloping at such a pace that, in a short time, the forest and all the country belonging to the magician lay far behind them. In the meantime, the magician returned to his palace, which he found in smoldering ruins. In vain he called for his servant. At last he went to look for him in the stables, and when he discovered that the black horse had disappeared too, he at once suspected that they had gone together. So he mounted a roan horse that was in the next stall, and set out in pursuit. As the prince rode, the quick ears of his horse heard the sound of pursuing feet. "Look behind you," he said, "and see if the old man is coming." And the prince turned in his saddle and saw a cloud of like smoke and dust in the distance. "We must hurry," said the horse. After they galloped for some time, the horse said again, "Look behind, and see if he is still in some distance." "He is quite close," answered the prince. "Then throw the looking-glass on the ground," said the horse. So the prince threw it, and then the magician came up. The roan horse stepped on the mirror, and crash! His foot went through the glass, and he stumbled and fell, cutting his feet so badly that there was nothing for the old man to do but to go slowly back with him to the stables and put new shoes on his feet. Then they started once more in pursuit of the prince, for the magician set great value on that horse, and was determined not to lose it. In the meanwhile, the prince had gone great distances, but the quick ears of the black horse detected the sound of falling feet from afar. "Dismount," he said to the prince. "Put your ear to the ground and tell me if you do not hear a sound." So the prince dismounted and listened. "I seem to hear the earth tremble," he said. "I think he cannot be far off." "Mount me at once," answered the horse, "and I will gallop as fast as I can." And he set off so fast that the earth seemed to fly from under his hooves. "Look back once more," he said after a short time, "and see if he is in sight." "I see a cloud and a flame," answered the prince, "but a long way off." "We must make haste," said the horse, and shortly after, again he said, "Look back again. He can't be far off now." The prince turned in his saddle and exclaimed, "He is close behind us. In a minute the flame of his horse's nostrils will reach us." "And throw the brush on the ground," said the horse. And the prince threw it. In an instant the brush changed into a thick wood that even a bird could not have gotten through. And when the old man got up to it, the roan horse came suddenly to a standstill, and not able to advance a step into the thick tangle. So there was nothing for the magician to do but retrace his steps to fetch an axe, with which he cut himself away through the woods. But it took him some time, during which the prince and the black horse got well ahead. But once more they heard the sound of pursuing feet. "Look back," he said, "and see if he is following." "Yes," answered the prince. "This time I hear him distinctly." "Let us hurry on," said the horse, and a little later he said, "Look back now, and see if he is in sight." "Yes," the prince said, turning round. "I see the flame. He is close behind us." "Then you must throw down the whip," answered the horse, and in a twinkling of an eye the whip was changed into a broad river. When the old man got up to it, he urged the roan horse into the water, but as the water mounted higher and higher, the magic flame which gave the magician all his power grew smaller and smaller, till with a fizz it went out, and the old man and his roan horse sank into the river and disappeared. When the prince looked round, they were no longer to be seen. "Now," said the horse, "you may dismount. There is nothing more to fear, for the magician is dead. Beside that brook you will find a willow wand. Gather it and strike the earth with it, and it will open, and you will find a door at your feet." When the prince had struck the earth with the wand, the door appeared, and opened into a large vaulted stone hall. "Lead me into the hall," said the horse. "I will stay there, but you must go through the fields till you reach the garden, in the midst of which you will find the king's palace. When you get there, you must ask to be taken into the king's service. Goodbye, and don't forget me." So they parted. But first the horse made the prince promise not to let anyone in the palace see his golden hair. So he bound the scarf around it, like a turban, and the prince set out through the fields till he reached a beautiful garden, and beyond the garden he saw the walls and the towers of a stately palace. At the garden gate he met the gardener, who asked him what he wanted. "I want to take service with the king," replied the prince. "Well, you may stay and work under me in the garden," said the man, for the prince was dressed like a poor man. He could not tell that he was a king's son. "I need someone to weed the ground and to sweep the dead leaves from the paths. You shall have a florin a day, a horse to help you in the cart the leaves away, and food and drink." So the prince consented and set about his work. But when his food was given to him, he only ate half of it. The rest he carried to the tall beside the brook, and gave it to the black horse. As he did this every day, the horse thanked him for his faithful friendship. One evening, as they were together, after his work in the garden was over, the horse said to him, "Tomorrow a large company of princes and great lords are coming to your king's palace. They are coming from far and near as wooers for the 3 princesses. They will all stand in a row in the courtyard of the palace, and the 3 princesses will come out, and each one will carry a diamond apple in her hand, which she will throw at the air. At whoever's feet the apple falls will be the bridegroom of that princess. You must be close by the garden at your work. The apple of the youngest princess, who is the most beautiful of the sisters, will roll past the wooers and stop in front of you. Pick it up at once and put it into your pocket." The next day, the wooers were all assembled in the courtyard of the castle. Everything happened just as the horse had said. The princesses threw the apples into the air, and the diamond apple, as the youngest princess, rolled past all the wooers and out onto the garden. It stopped at the feet of the young gardener, who was busy sweeping the leaves away. In a moment he had stooped down and picked up the apple and put it in his pocket. As he stooped, the scarf around his head slipped a little to one side, and the princess caught sight of his golden hair and loved him from that moment. She likes blondes. But the king was very sad, for the youngest daughter was the one he loved best. But there was no help for it. The next day, the 3-fold wedding was celebrated in the palace. And after the wedding, the youngest princess returned with her husband to the small hut in the garden where he lived. Some time after this, the people of the neighboring country went to war with the king, and he set out to battle, accompanied by the husbands of his 2 eldest daughters, mounted on stately steeds. But the husband of the youngest daughter had nothing but an old broken-down horse, which helped him in his garden work. And the king, who was ashamed of his son-in-law, refused to give him another. He was so determined not to be left behind, he went to the garden, mounted the sorry nag, and set out. But scarcely had he ridden a few yards before the horse stumbled and fell. So he dismounted and went down to the brook, to where the black horse lived in the vaulted hall. And the horse said to him, "Saddle and bridle me, and then go to the next room, and you will find a suit of armor and a sword. Put them on, and we will ride forth together to battle." And the prince did as he was told, and when he had mounted the horse, the armor glittered in the sun, and he looked so brave and so handsome that no one would have recognized him as the gardener who swept away the dead leaves in the paths. The horse bore him away at a great pace, and when they reached the battlefield, they saw the king was losing the day. So many of his warriors had been slain. But when the warrior on his black charger and glittering armor appeared on the scene, hewing right and left with his sword, the enemy was so dismayed and fled in all directions. Leaving the king the master of the field. When the king and his 2 son-in-laws, when they saw the deliverer, shouted, and all that was left of the army joined the cry, "A god has come to our rescue!" And they would have surrounded him, but his black horse rose in the air and bore him out of their sight. Soon after this, part of the country rose in rebellion against the king, and once more he and his 2 son-in-laws had to go forth to battle. And the son-in-law who was disguised as a gardener wanted to fight too. So he came to the king and said, "Dear father, let me ride with you against your enemies." "I don't want a blockhead like you in the fight with me," answered the king. "Besides, I haven't got a horse fit for you. But see, there's a carter on the road carting hay. You may take his horse." So the prince took the carter's horse, but the poor beast was tired and old, and after it had gone a few yards, it stumbled and fell. So the prince returned sadly to the garden and watched the king ride forth at the head of the army, accompanied by his two son-in-laws. When they were out of sight, the prince betook himself to the vaulted chamber by the brookside, and having taken counsel of the faithful black horse, put on the glimmering suit of armor, and was borne on the back of the horse through the air, to where the battle was being fought. And once more he routed the king's enemies, hacking to right and hacking to left with his sword. And again they all cried, "A god has come to our rescue!" But when they tried to detain him, and the black horse again rose into the air and bore him out of sight. When the king and his son-in-laws returned home, they could talk of nothing but the hero who had fought for them, and all wondered who he could be. Shortly afterwards, the king of a neighboring country declared war, and once more the king and his son-in-laws and his subjects had to prepare themselves for battle. And once more the prince begged to ride with him, but the king said he had no horse to spare for him. "But," he added, "you may take the horse of the woodsman who brings the wood for the forest. It is good enough for you." The prince took the woodsman's horse, but it was so old and useless that it could not carry him beyond the castle gates. So he betook himself once more to the vaulted hall, where the black horse was prepared a still more magnificent suit for him than the one he had worn on the previous occasions. And when he had put it on and mounted the back of the horse, it bore him straight into the battlefield, and once more he scattered the king's enemies, fighting single-handed in their ranks, and they all fled in all directions. But it happened that one of the enemies struck with his sword and wounded the prince in the leg. And the king took his own pocket handkerchief with his name and crown embroidered on it, because kings, and bound it around the wounded leg. And the king would fain have compelled him to mount a litter and be carried straight to the palace, and two of his knights were to lead the black charger to the royal stables. But the prince put his hand on the mane of his faithful horse and managed to pull himself into the saddle, and the horse mounted into the air with him. Then they all shouted and cried, "The warrior who fought for us is a god! He must be a god!" And throughout all the kingdom nothing else was spoken about, and all the people said, "Who can the hero be who has fought for us in so many battles? He cannot be a man. He must be a god." And the king said, "If only I could see him once more, and if I turned out that after all he was a man and not God, I would reward him with half of my kingdom." Now, when the prince had reached his home, the gardener's hut, where he kept his wife, he was weary. He lay down on his bed and slept. And his wife noticed the handkerchief bound around his wounded leg, and she wondered what it could be. And then she looked at it more closely and saw in the corner that it was embroidered with her father's name and the royal crown. She ran straight to the palace and told her father, and he and his two son-in-laws followed her back to the house. And there the gardener lay asleep in his bed. And the scarf that he always wore around his head had slipped off, and his golden hair gleamed on the pillow. And they all recognized that he was the hero who had fought and had won so many battles for them. Then there was a great rejoicing throughout the land, and the king rewarded his son-in-law with half his kingdom, and he and his wife reigned happily over it. So, make yourself unrecognizable. So, prince just being a prince, doing princely things with a princely horse. Magic horse. Oh well. Okay, 2 more stories left in the book. We can do this. We can do this. Our next story and one of the chapter titles in my book. The Grateful Beasts, from the Yellow Fairy book. There once upon a time was a man and woman who had 3 fine-looking sons, but they were so poor that they had hardly enough food for themselves, let alone their children. So the sons determined to set out in the world and find their own luck. Before starting, their mother gave them each a loaf of bread and her blessing, and having taken a tender farewell from her and their father, the 3 set forth on their travels. The youngest of the 3 brothers, whose name was Furco, was a beautiful youth with a splendid figure, blue eyes, fair hair, and the complexion of like milk and roses. Sounds dreamy. His 2 brothers were jealous of him as they could be, for they thought that his good looks would be for sure more fortunate than they would ever be. Pretty fortunate. One day all 3 were sitting resting under a tree, for the sun was hot and they were tired of walking. Furco fell asleep, and the other 2 remained awake. And the eldest said to the second brother, "What do you say by doing our little brother Furco some harm? He's so beautiful that everyone takes a fancy to him, which is more than they do for us. If we could only get him out of the way, we might have succeeded better." "I quite agree with you," answered the second brother. "And my advice is that we eat up his loaf of bread, and then refuse to give him a bit of ours until he has promised to let us put out his eyes and break our legs." Wow. His eldest brother was delighted at this proposal, and the 2 wicked wretches seized Furco's loaf and ate it all up, while the poor boy was still asleep. When he did awake, he felt very hungry and turned to eat his loaf, but his brothers cried out, "You ate your loaf in your sleep, you glutton, and you may starve as long as you like, but you won't get a scrap of ours." Furco was at a loss to understand how he could have eaten in his sleep, but he said nothing and fasted all that day and the next night. But on the following morning he was so hungry that he burst into tears and implored his brothers to give him a little bit of their bread. Then the cruel brothers laughed and repeated what they had said the day before. But when Furco continued to beg and beseech them, the eldest said at last, "If you will let us put out one of your eyes and break one of your legs, then we will give you a bit of our bread." Brothers. At these words, poor Furco wept more bitterly than before, and bore the torments of hunger till the sun was high in the heavens. Then he could stand it no longer. He consented to allow his left eye to be put out, and his left leg to be broken. When this was done, he stretched out his hand eagerly for the piece of bread. But his brothers gave him such a tiny scrap that the starving youth finished it in a moment, and besought him for the second bit. But the more Furco wept and told his brothers that he was dying of hunger, the more they laughed and scolded him for his greed. So he endured the pangs of starvation all that day, and when night came his endurance gave way, and he let his right eye be put out, and his right leg be broken for a second piece of bread. After his brothers had thus successfully maimed and disfigured him for life, they left him groaning on the ground and continued their journey without him. Poor Furco ate up the last scrap of bread they had left him, and wept bitterly, but no one heard him or came to his help. Night came on, and the poor blind youth had no eyes to close, and could only crawl along the ground, not knowing in the least where he was going. But when the sun was once more high in the heavens, Furco felt the blazing heat scorch him, and sought for some cool, shady place to rest his aching limbs. He climbed to the top of a hill and lay down in the grass, and as he thought, under the shadow of a big tree. But it was no great tree he was leaning against, but a gallows on which 2 ravens were seated. One was saying to the other as the weary youth lay down,
"Is there anything the least wonderful or remarkable about this neighborhood?" "I should think there was," replied the other, "and many things that don't exist anywhere else in the world. There's a lake down there below us. Anyone who bathes in it, though he were at dust or becomes sound and well on the spot. And those who wash their eyes with the dew on the hill become as sharp-sighted as an eagle, even if they have been blind from their youth."
"Convenient."
"Well," answered the first raven, "my eyes are in the want for a healing bath, for however heaven be praised, they're as good as they ever were. But my wing has been feeble and weak ever since it was shot in the arrow many times ago. Let us fly at once to the lake, that I may be restored to health and strength again."
And so they flew away. Their words rejoiced Fergo's heart, and he waited impatiently till evening should come, so he could try to rub the precious dew on his sightless eyes. At last it began to grow dusk. The sun sank behind the mountains. Gradually it became cooler on the hill, and as the grass grew wet with dew. Then Ferko buried his face in the ground till his eyes were damp with dewdrops, and in a moment he saw clearer than he had ever seen before in his life. The moon was shining brightly and lighted him to the lake where he could bathe his poor broken legs. Then Ferko crawled to the edge of the lake and dipped his limbs in the water. No sooner had he done so than his legs felt as sound and as strong as they had been before, and Ferko thanked the kind fate that had led him to the hill where he had overheard the ravens' conversation. He filled a bottle with the healing water, and then continued his journey in the best of spirits. He had not gone far before he met a wolf, who was limping disconsolately along on 3 legs, and who, on perceiving Ferko, began to growl dismally. "My good friend," said the youth, "be of good cheer, for I can heal your leg." And with these words he poured some of the precious water over the wolf's paw, and in a minute the animal was springing about as sound as well on all 4s. The grateful creature thanked his benefactor warmly, and promised Ferko to do him a good turn if he should ever need it. Ferko continued on his way until he came to a plow field. Here he noticed a little mouse creeping warily along on its hind paws, for its front paws had both been broken in a trap. Ferko felt so sorry for the little beast that he spoke to it in the most friendly manner, and washed its paws with the healing water. In a moment the mouse was as sound and whole, and after thanking the kind physician it scampered away in the plowed furrows. Ferko once again proceeded on his journey, but he hadn't gone far before a queen bee flew against him, trailing one wing behind her, which had been cruelly torn in 2 by a big bird. Ferko was no less willing to help her than he had been with the wolf and the mouse, so he poured some of the healing drops over her wounded wing. On the spot the queen bee was cured, and turning to Ferko said,
"I'm most grateful for your kindness, and shall reward you some day."
And with these words she flew away, humming gaily. Then Ferko wandered on for many a long day, and at length reached a strange kingdom. Here, he thought to himself, he might as well go straight to the palace and offer his services to the king and the country, for he had heard that the king's daughter was beautiful as the day. So he went to the royal palace, and as he entered the door, the first people he saw were two brothers who had so shamefully ill-treated him. They had managed to obtain places in the king's service, and one recognized Furco with his eyes and his legs sound, and, well, they were frightened to death, for they feared he would tell the king of their conduct and that they would be hung. No sooner had Furco entered the palace than all eyes were turned on the handsome youth, and the king's daughter herself was lost in admiration, for she had never seen anyone so handsome in her life before. His brothers noticed this, and the envy and jealousy were added to their fear, so much so that they determined once more to destroy him. They went to the king and told him that Furco was a wicked magician who had come to the palace in the intention of carrying off the princess. And the king had Furco brought before him and said, "You are accused of being a magician who wishes to rob me of my daughter, and I condemn you to death. But if you can fulfill 3 tasks which I shall set you to do, on your own life will be spared, on condition you leave the country. But if you cannot perform what I demand, you will be hung from the nearest tree." And turning to the 2 wicked brothers, he said, "Suggest something for him to do, no matter how difficult. He must succeed by it or die." They did not long think for it, but replied, "Let him build your majesty in one day a more beautiful palace than this, and if he fails in the attempt, let him be hung." The king was pleased with this proposal, and commanded Furco to set to work the following day. The 2 brothers were delighted, for they thought they had now got rid of Furco forever. The poor youth himself was heartbroken, and cursed the hour he had crossed the boundary of the king's domain. As he was wandering disconsolately about the meadows of the palace, wondering how he could escape being put to death, a little bee flew past, and settled on his shoulder to whisper in his ear,
"What is troubling you, my kind benefactor? Can I be of any help to you? I am the bee whose wing you healed, and would like to show my gratitude in some way."
Furco recognized the queen bee and said, "Alas, how could you help me? For I have been set to do a task which no one in the whole world could do. Let him be as great as genius. Tomorrow I must build a palace more beautiful than the king's, and it must be finished before evening."
"Is that all?" answered the bee. "Then you may comfort yourself, for before the sun goes down tomorrow night the palace will be built unlike any the king has ever dwelt before. Just stay here till I come again and tell you that it is finished."
Having said this, she flew merrily away, and Furco, reassured by her words, lay down in the grass and slept peacefully until the next morning. Early on the following day, the whole town was at his feet, and everyone wondered how and where the stranger could build the wonderful palace. The princess alone was silent and sorrowful, and had cried all night till her pillow was wet, for she did much take the fate of the beautiful youth to heart. Furco spent the whole day in the meadows, waiting for the return of the bee, and when evening was come, the queen bee flew by and perched on his shoulder and said,
"There is a wonderful palace is ready. Be of good cheer and lead the king to the hill just the other side of the city walls."
And, humming gaily, she flew away again. Furco went at once to the king and told him the palace was finished, and the whole court went to see the wonder, and the astonishment was great at the sights which met their eyes. A splendid palace reared itself upon the hill just outside the walls of the city, made of the most exquisite flowers that ever grew in a mortal garden. The roof was of crimson roses, the windows of lilies, the walls of white carnations, the floors of glowing auriculas and violets, the doors of voluptuous tulips and narcissi, with sunflowers for knockers. And all around, hyacinthus and other sweet-smelling flowers bloomed in the masses, so that the air was perfumed far and near and enchanted all who were present. The splendid palace had been built by the grateful queen bee, who had summoned all the other bees in the kingdom to help her. The king's amazement knew no bounds, and the princess's eyes beamed with delight as she turned them from the wonderful building onto the delighted Farco. But the two brothers had grown quite green with envy, and had only declared the more that Farco was nothing but a wicked magician. The king, although he had surprised and astonished by the way the commands had been carried out, was very vexed that the stranger should escape with his life, and turning to the two brothers, he said, "He has certainly accomplished the first task, and with no doubt of his diabolical magic. But what shall we give him to do now? Let us make it as difficult as possible, and if he fails, he shall die." Then the oldest brother replied, "The corn has all been cut, but it has not been put into the barns. Let the knave collect all the grain from the kingdoms into the one big heap before tomorrow night, and if much of a stalk of corn is left, let him be put to death." The princess grew white with terror when she heard these words, but Farco felt much more cheerful than he had done the first time, and wandered out into the meadow again, wondering how he was to get out of this difficulty. But he could think of no way to escape, and the sun sank to rest and the night came on, when a little mouse started out from the grass at Farco's feet, and said to him,
"I'm delighted to see you, my kind benefactor, but why are you not looking so sad? Can I be of any help to you, and thus repay you for your great kindness to me?"
Then Farco recognized the mouse whose front paws he had healed, and replied, "Alas! How can you help me in a matter that is beyond my human power? Before tomorrow night, all the grain in the kingdom has to be gathered into one heap, and if as much of a stalk of corn is wanting, I must pay for it with my life."
"Is that all?" answered the mouse. "That needn't distress you too much. Just trust in me, and before the sun gets again, you shall hear that all your task is done."
And then with these words, the little creatures scampered away into the fields. Farco, who never doubted the mouse would be so good as his word, lay down comforted on the small, soft grass and slept soundly till the next morning. The day passed slowly, and with the evening came the little mouse and said,
"Now there's not a single stalk of corn left in any field. They're all collected in one big heap out in the field, on the hill over there."
Then Farco went joyfully to the king and told him that all he demanded had been done. The whole court went out to see the wonder, and were no less astonished than they had been the first time. For in a heap higher than the king's palace lay all the grain in the country, and not a single stalk of corn had been left behind in any of the fields. And how had all this been done? The little mouse had summoned every other mouse in the land to its help, and together they collected all the grain in the kingdom. The king could not hide his amazement, but at the same time his wrath increased, and he was more ready than ever to believe the two brothers, who kept on repeating that Farco was nothing more or less than a wicked magician. Only the beautiful princess rejoiced in Farco's success, and looked on him with friendly gazes, and the youth returned them. The more the cruel king gazed on the wonder before him, the more angry he became, for he could not, in the face of his promise, put a stranger to death. He turned once more to the brothers and said, "This diabolical magic has helped him again. But now what third task shall we set him to do? And no matter how impossible it is, he must do it or die." The eldest answered quickly, "Let him drive all the wolves from the kingdom on this hill before tomorrow night. If he does this, he may go free. If not, he shall be hung as you have said." At these words, the princess burst into tears. And when the king saw this, he ordered her to be shut up in the high tower and carefully guarded till the dangerous magician should either have left the kingdom or been hung by the nearest tree. Furco wandered out into the fields again and sat down on the stump of a tree, wondering what he should do next. Suddenly, a big wolf ran up to him and standing still said, "I am very glad to see you again, my kind benefactor. What are you thinking about all by yourself? If I can help you in any way, only say the word, for I would like to give you a proof of my gratitude." Furco at once recognized the wolf whose broken leg he had healed, and told him that he had to do the following day if he wishes to escape with his life. "But how in the world," he added, "am I to collect all the wolves of the kingdom onto that hill over there?" "If that's all you want done," answered the wolf, "you needn't worry yourself. I'll undertake the task, and you'll hear from me again before the sun sets tomorrow. Keep your spirits up." And with these words he trotted quickly away. And then the youth rejoiced greatly, for now he felt that his life was safe. But he grew very sad when he thought of the beautiful princess, and that he would never see her again if he left the country. He lay down once more on the grass and soon fell fast asleep. All the next day he spent wandering about the fields, and toward evening the wolf came running to him in great hurry and said, "I've collected together all the wolves of the kingdom, and they're waiting for you on the wood. Go quickly to the king and tell him that to go to the hill so that he may see the wonder you have done with your own eyes. Then return to me at once and get on my back, and I will help you drive all the wolves together." Then Furco went straight to the palace and told the king he was ready to perform the third task if he would come to the hill to see it done. Furco himself returned to the fields, and mounting the wolf's back, he rode to the wood close by. Quick as lightning the wolf flew around the wood, and in a minute many hundred wolves rose up before him, increasing in number every moment till they could have been counted by the thousands. He drove them all before him to the hill, where the king and his whole court and Furco's two brothers were standing. Only the lovely princess was not present, for she was shut up in her tower, weeping bitterly. The wicked brothers stamped and foamed with rage when they saw the failure of their wicked designs. But the king was overcome by sudden terror when he saw an enormous pack of wolves approaching nearer and nearer. And calling out to Furco, he said, "Enough! Enough! We don't want any more!" But the wolf on whose back Furco sat said to its rider, "Go on, go on." And at the same moment many more wolves ran up the hill, howling horribly and showing their teeth. The king in his terror shouted out, "Stop a moment! I will give you half my kingdom if you drive all the wolves away." But Furco pretended not to hear, and drove some more thousands before him, so that everyone quaked with horror and fear. Then the king raised his voice again and called out, "Stop! You shall have my whole kingdom, if only you were to drive these wolves back to the places they came from." But the wolf kept on encouraging Furco and said, "Go on, go on." So he led the wolves on until at last they fell on the king and on the wicked brothers, and ate them and the whole court up in a moment. And then Furco went straight to the palace and set the princess free, and on the same day he married her and was crowned king of the country. And the wolves all went peacefully back to their homes, and Furco said to his bride that they would live for many years in peace and happiness together, and were much beloved by great and small in the land. Thank you for the hydrate. Okay, so the army of wolves got to eat the royal court. That's just perfect. Oh, and a stretch. And another hydrate. Oh. Are the air switches going to work? They should be on. I hope they're on. Oh, damn it. Coin to your witcher, oh valley of plenty, oh valley of plenty, oh, oh. I'm on your switches. Why aren't you going off? What is wrong with my ear scratches? Why aren't they working? Yeah. Yeah, that's weird. I don't know why they're not working. It says they're active. Air scratches. Am I getting ear switches? Okay, YouTube Studio is saying it's not there. Oh, there it is. Not in the right place, but it's there. Okay. Okay, I've got one more story in this book. It's 3 pages. I will finish the book tonight. Now I gotta figure out what I'm gonna read next week. Oh well. Our final tale for this evening: The Jackal and the Spring, from the Grey Fairy book. Once upon a time, all the streams and rivers ran so dry that the animals did not know how to get water. After a very long search, which had been quite in vain, they found a tiny spring, which only wanted to be dug deeper as to yield plenty of water. So the beasts said to each other, Let us dig a well, and then we shall not fear dying from thirst. And they all consented except the jackal, who hated work of any kind, and generally got somebody to do it for him. When they had finished their well, they held a council as to who should be made the guardian of the well, so that the jackal might not come near it. For they said, he could not work, therefore he should not drink. After some talk, it was decided that the rabbit should be left in charge. Then all the other beasts went back to their homes. When they were out of sight, the jackal arrived. Good morning, rabbits. And the rabbits politely said,
Good morning.
and the jackal unfastened the little bag that hung at his side and pulled out a piece of honeycomb, which he began to eat. And turning to the rabbit, he remarked, You see, rabbit, I'm not thirsty in the least, but this is nicer than any water.
Give me a bit,
asked the rabbit. So the jackal handed him a very little morsel.
Oh, how good it is,
cried the rabbit.
Give me a little more, dear friend.
But the jackal answered, If you really want me to give you some more, you must have your paws tied behind you, and lie on your back so that I can put it into your mouth. Kinky. The rabbit did as he was bid, and when he was tied tight and propped up on his back, the jackal ran to the spring and drank as much as he wanted. When he is quite finished, he returned to his den. In the evening, the animals all came back, and when they saw the rabbit lying with his paws tied, they said to him, Rabbit, how did you let yourself be taken like this?
It was all the fault of the jackal, replied the rabbit. He tied me up like this and told me he would give me something nice to eat. It was all a trick just to get in our water.
Rabbit, you are no better than an idiot to have let the jackal drink our water when he would not help to find it. Who shall be our next watchman? We must have somebody a little sharper than you. And then the little hare called out,
I will be the watchman.
The following morning, the animals all went to their various ways, leaving the little hare to guard the spring. When they were out of sight, the jackal came back. Good morning, little hare. And the little hare politely said,
Good morning.
Can you give me a pinch of snuff? Said the jackal.
I am sorry, I have none,
answered the little hare. The jackal then came and sat down by the little hare, and unfastened his little bag and pulled out a piece of honeycomb. He licked his lips and exclaimed, Oh, little hare, if only you knew how good it was.
What is that?
asked the little hare. It is something that moistens my throat so deliciously, answered the jackal, that after I've eaten it I don't feel thirsty any more. While I'm sure that all of the other beasts are even forever wanting water.
Give me a little bit, dear friend,
asked the little hare. Not so fast, replied the jackal. If you really wish to enjoy what you are eating, you must have your paws tied behind you, and lie on your back so that I can pour it into your mouth.
You can tie them, only be quick,
said the little hare. And when he was tied tight and propped up on his back, the jackal went quietly down to the well and drank as much as he wanted. When he was quite finished, he returned to his den. And in the evening the animals all came back, and when they saw the little hare with his paws tied, they said to him, "Little hare, how did you let yourself be taken in like this? Didn't you boast you were very sharp? You undertook the guard to our water. Now show us how much is left for us to drink."
It is all the fault of the jackal, replied the little hare. He told me he would give me something nice to eat if I would let him tie my hands behind my back.
How many times have you heard that? No, hold on, hold on. And then the animal said, "We can trust. Who can we trust to mount guard now?" And the panther answered, "That be the tortoise." The following morning, the animals all went to their various ways, leaving the tortoise to guard the spring. When they were out of sight, the jackal came back. "Good morning, tortoise, good morning." But the tortoise took no notice. "Good morning, tortoise, good morning." But still the tortoise pretended not to hear. Then the jackal said to himself, "Well, today I've got to manage a bigger idiot than before. I shall kick him on one side and then go and have a drink." So he went up to the tortoise and said to him in a soft voice, "Tortoise, tortoise." But the tortoise took no notice. Then the jackal kicked him out of the way and went to the well and began to drink. But scarcely had he touched the water than the tortoise seized him by the leg. The jackal shrieked out, "Ow, you'll break my leg!" But the tortoise only held on tighter. The jackal then took his bag and tried to make the tortoise smell the honeycomb he had inside. But the tortoise turned away his head and smelt nothing. At last the jackal said to the tortoise, "I should like to give you my bag and everything in it." But the only answer the tortoise made was to grasp the jackal's leg tighter. So matters stood still when the other animals came back. The moment he saw them, the jackal gave a violent tug and managed to free his leg. And then he took to his heels as fast as he could. And the animals all said to the tortoise, "Well done, tortoise. You have proved your courage. Now we can drink from our well in peace, as you have gotten better of the thieving jackal." Jackals be Jacqueline. Yes, this sounds weird. Anyway, the book's finished. Now I really do have to find more to read next week. Oh, it is October. I guess I could try to do some horror stuff next week. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But anyway, thank you for the loud R2 scream in my ear for the gift sub. Oh. That's not going to end up on the VOD. So it's going to be just shrieking in my ear. So. Oh, God, that was loud, though. Let's see. Oh, excuse me. Who was on that is rateable? Waste is ending, so I'll do it over there. I know, let's see, is EB still on? EB is still on. I saw Dusk come on while I was reading. Lavinia's not on. Why don't I have a dusk window open already? What the hell? I always have a dusk window. Oh, so I can spell one-handed. So which do you think, Dusk or Eevee? Or if you know anyone else, I mean. Sure, anyone here has more than enough points to redeem that if they wanted to. Let's see. Looking over my following lists, there's names that are different that I don't recognize. That always worries me. I would flip a coin, but I don't have a coin to flip right now. Oh, Guilty's on too. Huh. Of course, I don't have any dust mods right now, do I? Let me see. Do I have one? I'm curious. I don't think this will do anything, but... Nope. Doesn't exist. Okay. So I've just got 3. Yeah, I read Guilty. I haven't read him for a while. And my lovely assistant Kel is showing you the messages. Oh, let's go read Guilty. What? How did my... Oh, his channel set that. Okay. So I will possibly see people tomorrow. I don't know. I may stream some more. But have a good evening, good night, morning, whichever time zone you may be in. And I shall see you around. And someday I'm going to replace my closing music. So let's go watch Guilty play Warhammer, I think.